Welcome back to my channel. I am Linda and I am an intuitive healer and an awareness coach. And in this channel, we talk about how to apply spiritual and personal development concepts in a practical way so that you can use them to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And thank you for your support. So I wanted to come here and talk a little bit about this situation with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, really the trial that is going on, because this situation has been going on for years. I can't remember how long ago did it begin, but it's certainly been, I think, at least 5 years, if not longer. And I haven't been paying attention to the trials. I know that there are channels on YouTube that are basically streaming the case and adding commentary to that, etc. And I really don't have the time, the energy, or the interest to do something like that. But I did want to talk a little bit about it because I think the popularity of this case and the public interest in this case is a great opportunity to really open up a discussion about trauma and about how trauma manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It has been clear to me, and I think to a lot of people for some time, that Johnny Depp is actually someone who is in fact traumatized. I think that while he has lived a fairly quiet life, well, prior to this circus really, but I think it's become clearer and clearer that he does have a lot of childhood trauma. I believe I've actually even heard, and I actually don't know if this was a clip from this trial or another deposition that he's made or some other conversation or interview that he did where he talked about his mother being abusive, not just physically, but verbally and emotionally. And the reason why that stuck with me is because he said something in that interview that was very similar to my perspective on abuse, which is that oftentimes, not always, obviously everyone's experience is different, but oftentimes for someone who experienced both physical and emotional and psychological abuse, they often find it a lot harder to deal with the emotional and psychological abuse. I know in particular that is my case, and there's a lot of different reasons why that happens, but I also want to honor that everyone's experience is different, and also it has a lot to do with the degree of the physical abuse. Obviously, someone that was severely physically injured or sexually injured, etc., has a lot of trauma surrounding that. And for them, that experience may be a lot more damaging than potentially worse or any emotional or psychological abuse. But my point is that that image of him or that memory of him talking about it stuck with me because I related to it so deeply. Now, one of the reasons why it has always been clear to me that he has trauma is because of his alleged substance dependency. Now, I don't want to call it drug addiction or abuse. I also don't want to be specific because I don't know the specifics, but I know there's been some discussion over the last few years about the fact that he uses alcohol and some other substances to self-soothe and for potentially entertainment purposes, etc. But there does seem to be at least an allegation that he has a substance dependency, and that is oftentimes a telltale sign that someone has childhood trauma. Now, it is not unusual in our society that someone who has trauma subconsciously chooses and ends up in a relationship with someone else with trauma. Now, this is something that oftentimes can fall into the category of trauma bonding. Now, I'm not going to define the term here because that is really mostly a psychological term, but I do want to be very clear that trauma bonding can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And oftentimes it ends up looking like codependency because you end up in a codependent relationship, and also it could end up looking like Stockholm syndrome. And there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but mostly and in general, it is an adaptive behavior. Think about Stockholm syndrome when you are being held captive and you bond with your captor. Oftentimes, subconsciously, right, because this is not happening at the conscious level, the motivation and the reasoning behind it, what's happening in your subconscious mind, is that it understands that your survival is dependent on this person. So you end up figuring out different types of ways to survive, and bonding with them is one of those alternatives. It actually goes back to the very instinctual fight, flight, freeze, appease, right? You end up trying to bond with that person, not just because that could ensure your survival, because if you bond with them and there's some sort of relationship established, that person may be nicer to you, that person may not beat you or hurt you as much, that person may let you go, but also because it allows you to maintain some sense of sanity and the appearance of safety. In that, you feel that you're in control of the situation to some degree or to whatever extent is possible, and therefore, if you control your behavior so that you are nice and appeasing your captor, therefore your risk of injury is going to be minimized and your possibility of survival is going to be maximized. Having said that, I think it's really important that we understand that for that to happen, both people need to be traumatized. And I say this because there's a lot of polarity regarding this subject, right? There's the Team Amber and Team Johnny. I don't usually ascribe to those types of breakdowns. I'm almost always team both or team neither, right? In most of these types of, popular celebrity scenarios. But in this case in particular, what I find really interesting is that a lot of people believe that she wasn't abused. And I feel very strongly, and this is an opinion, I don't know either of them other than what I've seen, about them in magazines, on TV, in the movies, etc. I don't know anything about this case, right? So this is a very personal opinion. I actually do believe that she was abused. I just don't believe that she was abused by Johnny Depp. I think that is the key difference. And I know to most people that is something unimportant or irrelevant fact or theory, I should say. But I think the reason why it is important is because people who are traumatized, especially those who are severely traumatized, perceive situations very differently than those who are not. So, number one, she may be perceiving exchanges she had with Johnny Depp as him being abusive towards her, well, no pun intended, towards her. That was definitely a Freudian slip. Towards her, even though that may not have been the intent. Like maybe he, for example, could have said something, and I'm using them as an example of how this types of situations happen in the general population, right? I have no knowledge of this case, but what I have seen happen is, and I know this from my own experience, is that when you are someone who has abuse trauma, you tend to view the world through the lens of your past experience. That is, through the lens of your past abuse. Therefore, things that people may say or do around you or to you that someone else who doesn't have childhood trauma may perceive as normal, to you may be perceived as an attack or as abuse. The disclaimer here, or really the caveat here, is that sometimes if both people are conscious enough, these relationships can also be incredibly healing. But in order for that to happen, it requires that both parties are fully conscious and aware of their own wounding and are actively taking steps and committed towards their own healing. It also requires that they have someone that can help them navigate or facilitate the ins and outs of their codependency or trauma bonding. And that could take the form of a therapist, of a coach, of a healer, depending. Someone who is skilled at managing and helping them navigate the ins and outs, because when you are in this type of relationship and you're consciously using it towards your own healing, you know going in that there's going to be a lot of triggers and a lot of things are going to come up pretty regular. I mean, it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, right? Like you hit one and then another one pops up. It can actually be very healing. But it also requires a lot of discernment, because you need to be able to tell when something has gone past the point of healing. The second reason why it's important that we take these types of things into consideration is because in order for us to heal as a society, we need to be able to look at this in a holistic way, to look at it from different angles. That doesn't mean that you condone her behavior if she in fact, if she in fact abused him, though there's been apparently enough evidence that she has. Again, I'm not following this very closely, so I don't really know for sure. But from an objective observer's perspective, it certainly seems like she was abusive in that relationship, not just emotionally, but also physically, psychologically, verbally, etc. Again, just an opinion. However, it is important that we recognize that while we are not condoning the behavior, we also need to look for alternatives on how to deal with these people that were potentially severely traumatized through no fault of their own. It is obviously, once you become an adult, it is your responsibility to seek healing, to try and come to a place where your behavior, you're more conscious and your behavior is not negatively impacting people around you. However, that is a lot easier said than done. So while it's not my personal belief that she was abused by Johnny Depp, I really do believe strongly that she has suffered, in my opinion, some pretty severe abuse through childhood and potentially through her young adulthood as well. And I can't help but have some compassion for that and have some compassion for her. Again, that's not to say that if she in fact lied about these things and made up these allegations, that there are no consequences for her. And that is also not to say that she shouldn't be held accountable for her words, for her behavior, etc. But in order for us to have the type of world that I believe most of us want to live in, we have to be willing to navigate these polarities. The world is not black and white. Now, if my opinion of the circumstances of this case is in fact true, what I hope is that they both find healing. Because clearly he needs to heal his own wounds so he doesn't continue to go through life engaging in these types of situations that are really detrimental to his overall health, right? Emotional, psychological, mental, physical, etc. But also that she too gets help. She gets some level of clarity that allows her to connect the dots in her mind so that she can then be open to seeking help and healing. And it is important because only by acknowledging that we are traumatized can we then start taking steps towards real healing.